I thought the worst thing about having a difficult mother-in-law was the constant criticism and backhanded compliments. I was wrong. The worst thing was discovering that every tear I cried, every moment of self-doubt she planted in my mind, was part of a calculated plan to steal my baby from me. My husband said she only meant well, but those text messages told a very different story. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of family manipulation and emotional abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. The first time I met Margaret Williams, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. She hugged me tight at David's apartment door and said, "Oh, honey, you're even more beautiful than David described. Welcome to the family." Her smile was warm, her eyes crinkled with genuine seeming joy, and she'd brought homemade cookies that smelled like heaven. That was 3 years ago, before I became her daughter-in-law, before I gave birth to her first grandchild, and before I learned that some people can weaponize kindness. My name is Sarah, and I'm a registered nurse at City General Hospital. I've always prided myself on being able to read people. It's part of my job. I can spot a difficult patient from across the ward, sense when someone's hiding their pain, and know instinctively when a family member is struggling with a loved one's diagnosis. But somehow I completely missed the signs with Margaret. Maybe it was because I wanted so desperately to be loved by David's family. My own parents had passed away in a car accident when I was 25, and the loneliness of having no family left a hole in my heart that I didn't even realize I was trying to fill. When David proposed 2 years after we met, Margaret cried happy tears and immediately started talking about wedding plans and future grandchildren. "I've always wanted a daughter," she told me that night, holding my hands in hers. "David's father passed when he was just 16, so it's been just the two of us for so long. You're such a blessing, Sarah." I should have paid more attention to that phrase. Just the two of us. I should have noticed how she always positioned herself as David's primary emotional support, the one person who truly understood him. But I was too busy feeling grateful that this elegant, put-together woman wanted me in her family. Margaret was everything I wasn't. She had perfectly styled silver hair that never seemed to move, clothes that looked expensive even when they were casual, and a way of speaking that made everything sound important and authoritative. She'd been a high school principal for 30 years before retiring, and she carried that air of someone accustomed to being listened to and obeyed. I, on the other hand, was the daughter of immigrants who worked double shifts to put me through nursing school. My idea of dressing up was clean scrubs and hair that wasn't falling out of its ponytail. Next to Margaret, I always felt a little rough around the edges, a little too loud, a little too much. But she never made me feel that way directly. That's what made her so dangerous. The warning signs started small during our engagement. She'd make comments like, "Oh, Sarah, you're so lucky David doesn't mind that you work such long hours. Some men want their wives to be more available." Or, "I hope you'll consider taking David's name completely when you marry. Hyphenated names are so complicated." Each comment was delivered with a smile, often followed by a little laugh that suggested she was just being silly. When I'd mention them to David later, he'd wave them off. "That's just mom being mom. She means well, but she's from a different generation. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally." That became David's favorite phrase whenever his mother said something that left me feeling small and confused. The wedding planning was when things really started to escalate, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Margaret had opinions about everything: the venue. "Are you sure the community center is elegant enough for David?" The menu, Asian fusion, might be too exotic for some of our relatives, and especially my dress. Strapless might be a bit too revealing for a church wedding, don't you think? Every suggestion was wrapped in concern for David's happiness, or what people might think. She never directly criticized me, but somehow every conversation left me second, guessing my choices and wondering if I was being selfish or inconsiderate. The worst part was that David genuinely couldn't see it. When I tried to explain how his mother's comments made me feel, he'd look genuinely confused. "But she's trying to help, Sarah. She just wants our wedding to be perfect. Isn't that sweet?" I started to wonder if I was being oversensitive. Maybe growing up without a mother had left me unable to appreciate maternal guidance. Maybe I was reading malice into kindness, because I wasn't used to having someone care about the details of my life. So I swallowed my discomfort and smiled through the wedding planning. I let Margaret talk me out of the community centre and into the country club where she was a member. I changed the menu to something more traditional. I even bought a different dress with a higher neckline and longer sleeves. Our wedding day was beautiful, I have to admit. Everything looked perfect in the photos. But when I look at those pictures now, all I can see is how tense my smile looks, how my shoulders are slightly hunched as if I'm trying to make myself smaller. In every photo with Margaret, she's beaming like she's the mother of the bride, and I'm standing slightly behind David, like I'm not quite sure I belong there. The honeymoon gave me a brief reprieve from Margaret's helpful presence, but even then, she managed to insert herself into our first days as newlyweds. She called David every other day to check in, sent care packages to our hotel with snacks, and little notes about things we shouldn't forget to do when we got home. She's just excited about having a new family member, David said when I gently suggested that maybe we didn't need daily contact with his mother during our honeymoon. She's been alone for so long, Sarah. It means everything to her that I'm happy. That phrase, she's been alone for so long, became another one of David's go-to explanations for his mother's behavior. It was like a magic spell that instantly made any criticism of Margaret seem cruel and heartless. How could I object to a lonely widow who just wanted to be close to her son? When we returned from our honeymoon and moved into our new house, Margaret's visits became a regular weekly occurrence. Every Sunday, she'd arrive with groceries. I was at the store anyway. Flowers for the table. Your yard doesn't have much color yet. Or a casserole. I made too much for just me. The gifts always came with gentle corrections or suggestions. The groceries included healthier alternatives to things I'd put on our list. David's always had a sensitive stomach. Dear. The flowers were planted exactly where she thought they should go. Trust me, I've been gardening for decades. The casseroles came with detailed instructions about David's preferences. He likes his vegetables softer than this, but I'm sure you'll figure out his tastes. I tried to be grateful. I really did. Having someone care enough to bring groceries and cook for us should have felt like a blessing. But instead, every visit left me feeling like I was failing some test I didn't know I was taking. The worst part was how David transformed when his mother was around. The man who usually helped with dishes and grocery shopping would suddenly become helpless, letting Margaret take over our kitchen while he sat at the table like a child being served. He'd talk to her about work problems he hadn't mentioned to me, ask her advice about decisions we'd already made together, and laugh at stories I'd heard a dozen times before. It was like watching my husband revert to being someone else's little boy, and I was just a guest in their relationship. But still, I told myself Margaret meant well. Still, I tried to be the daughter-in-law she seemed to want. Still, I swallowed my growing resentment and smiled through the Sunday visits that left me feeling invisible in my own home. I had no idea that everything was about to get so much worse, because 3 months after our wedding, I found out I was pregnant. When I saw those 2 pink lines, my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the test. David and I had been trying for a baby for 6 months, and suddenly there it was, our future staring back at me from a little plastic stick. I wanted to run to David immediately to share this moment that we'd been dreaming about. But he was at work, and I had the day off, so I sat on our bathroom floor for 20 minutes just staring at the test and letting the reality sink in. I was going to be a mother. By the time David got home that evening, I had planned the perfect reveal. I'd bought a little gift box and put the pregnancy test inside with a note that said, "Coming January 2024. I was practically vibrating with excitement as I watched him open it. His face went through so many emotions: confusion, realization, pure joy, and then something that looked almost like panic. But the joy won out, and he picked me up and spun me around our kitchen while we both cried happy tears. "I can't believe it," he kept saying. "We're going to be parents. Sarah, we're going to have a baby." It was perfect. It was everything I'd imagined our pregnancy announcement would be. And then David said the words that should have been my first real warning. "We'll have to call Mom right away." She's going to be so excited to be a grandmother. I wanted to keep the news to ourselves for just a little while longer. Most couples wait until the end of the first trimester to tell people, and I was barely 6 weeks along. But David was already reaching for his phone, and his excitement was so infectious that I didn't want to be the one to dampen it. Margaret answered on the first ring, like she always did when David called. "David, honey." "What a nice surprise!" "How are you?" "We have news," David said, putting the phone on speaker. "Sarah's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When Margaret finally responded, her voice was bright and cheerful, but something felt off. "Oh my goodness, that's wonderful news! Sarah, honey, how are you feeling?" "Good," I managed to say. A little nervous, but excited. "Of course you are, dear. First pregnancies can be so overwhelming. Thank goodness you'll have family to help guide you through it." That phrase, "guide you through it," should have set off alarm bells. But I was too caught up in the moment to pay attention to the subtle implication that I couldn't handle pregnancy without supervision. "I'll be over Sunday with some pregnancy books," Margaret continued. "And we'll need to start planning, of course. There's so much to think about: doctors, nurseries, baby names. It's going to be such an adventure." After we hung up, David was glowing with happiness. "She's so excited," he said. "This baby is going to be so loved." But something about Margaret's response nagged at me. It wasn't what she said, it was what she didn't say. No congratulations to us as a couple. No acknowledgement that this was our moment, our news, our baby. Just immediate plans for her involvement and guidance. I pushed the feeling aside. This was my first pregnancy, and maybe I was being paranoid. Margaret was going to be a grandmother, of course she was excited and wanted to help. That Sunday, Margaret arrived with not just pregnancy books, but 3 shopping bags full of them, along with prenatal vitamins, special teas, and a folder full of printed articles about pregnancy, nutrition, and exercise. "I've been doing research all week," she announced, spreading everything across our dining room table like she was setting up a command center. "There's so much more information available now than when I was pregnant with David. You're so lucky to have all these resources." She opened one of the books to a page she'd marked with a sticky note. "Now, this chapter talks about the importance of proper nutrition during the first trimester. Sarah, dear, I noticed you've been drinking coffee when I visit. The book says that should really be limited. I had been drinking coffee 1 cup a day, which my doctor had said was fine. But suddenly I felt guilty, like I'd been doing something wrong without realizing it. My doctor said 1 cup a day is okay," I said weakly. Margaret's smile never wavered, but her eyes got that look I was starting to recognize, the one that said she knew better than whatever expert I was citing. "Well, every doctor is different, I suppose. But why take any risks with something so precious? I brought you some wonderful herbal teas instead, much safer for the baby." David nodded along enthusiastically. "That makes sense, doesn't it, Sarah? Better to be extra careful." And just like that, I found myself agreeing to give up my morning coffee. It seemed like such a small thing, and Margaret was clearly trying to help. But looking back, I can see it was the first test, the first time she pushed a boundary, and I let her. The visits became more frequent during my pregnancy. Instead of just Sundays, Margaret started dropping by on weekday evenings to check on how Sarah is feeling, or weekends to help with housework since Sarah needs to rest. She brought more books, more articles, more advice. She had opinions about my prenatal vitamins. These aren't the brand I would have chosen. My exercise routines. Walking is good, but you should really try prenatal yoga. And my work schedule. Are you sure it's safe to be on your feet for 12-hour shifts? Each suggestion was presented as caring concern, but the cumulative effect was that I started doubting every choice I made. Was I eating enough protein? Too much sugar? Getting enough sleep? Too much exercise? Not enough exercise. I started calling my OB/GYN's office so frequently with questions that I'm sure they thought I was a complete hypochondriac. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow failing at being pregnant, that everyone else knew secrets I hadn't learned yet. The worst part was how Margaret's advice often contradicted what my doctors told me. When my OB said my weight gain was perfect, Margaret would suggest I might want to be more careful about portion sizes. When my doctor said my blood pressure was excellent, Margaret would bring articles about pregnancy hypertension and the importance of monitoring stress levels. I just want to make sure you have all the information, she'd say whenever I looked confused by the conflicting advice. Doctors are wonderful, but they can't spend as much time with you as family can. Sometimes a mother's intuition is just as valuable as medical training. A mother's intuition. She said those words with such confidence, such authority, that it took me weeks to realize the implication that she had maternal instincts about my pregnancy. And I somehow didn't. David didn't see the problem. To him, his mother was being incredibly supportive and helpful. When I tried to explain how her constant advice was making me anxious, he'd look genuinely confused. But she's trying to help, Sarah. She raised me and I turned out fine. Don't you want the baby to have the benefit of her experience? The question made me feel selfish and ungrateful. Of course I wanted what was best for the baby. Of course I should appreciate having an experienced mother figure to guide me. My own mother wasn't there to help me through pregnancy. Shouldn't I be grateful that Margaret was stepping in? But the anxiety continued to build. I started having trouble sleeping, not because of pregnancy discomfort, but because my mind raced with worries about all the things Margaret had suggested I might be doing wrong. I began keeping a food diary to track my nutrition, monitoring my heart rate during walks, and reading pregnancy books late into the night. David noticed my anxiety and suggested I talk to someone about it. Pregnancy can be overwhelming, he said. Maybe you should see a counselor or join a support group. It was good advice, and I appreciated his concern. But what I couldn't explain to him was that my anxiety wasn't really about pregnancy. It was about feeling like I was being watched and judged every step of the way by someone who seemed to know more about my own pregnancy than I did. The final straw came during my baby shower, which Margaret had insisted on hosting. I had wanted something small and simple, maybe just a few close friends at our house. But Margaret had bigger plans. This is my first grandchild, she said when I suggested a smaller celebration. We need to do this right. I have the perfect venue, and I know exactly how to make it special. The shower was beautiful, I have to admit. Margaret had booked a private room at the country club, decorated everything in soft yellow and green, and invited what seemed like half the town. But as I sat in the chair of honor, opening gift after gift, I realized that almost none of my friends were there. The guest list was dominated by Margaret's friends from church, her former colleagues, and David's extended family. "Sarah, dear, hold up that adorable outfit so everyone can see," Margaret would say after each gift. Or, "Isn't Sarah lucky to have such thoughtful friends?" But somehow, she was the one everyone looked at when they spoke, the one they thanked for hosting such a lovely event. I felt like a prop at my own baby shower. The worst moment came when one of Margaret's friends asked about my birth plan. Before I could answer, Margaret jumped in. "We're still discussing the options," she said, as if she were part of the decision-making process. "I've been sharing information about different approaches with Sarah. It's so important to be well informed about these things." Later, when another guest asked about maternity leave, Margaret again answered for me. "Sarah's planning to take the full 12 weeks, which I think is wise. The first few months are so crucial for bonding, and it's wonderful that she'll have family support during that adjustment period." By the end of the shower, I felt like everyone in the room knew more about my pregnancy plans than I did. Margaret had somehow positioned herself as the expert on my own life, and I had just sat there and let it happen. That night, I cried for the first time since the pregnancy began, not from joy or hormones, but from frustration and a growing sense that I was losing control of my own experience of becoming a mother. David found me crying in the bathroom and was immediately concerned. "What's wrong? Are you feeling okay? Is it the baby?" How could I explain that I felt like I was disappearing? Like my pregnancy was becoming more about Margaret's experience of becoming a grandmother than my experience of becoming a mother. How could I tell him that his mother's help was making me feel incompetent and invisible? "I'm just overwhelmed," I said finally. "Everything feels so complicated." David held me and stroked my hair. "It's going to be okay," he said. "We have so much help and support. Mom's going to be amazing with the baby. You don't have to worry about figuring everything out on your own." But that was exactly what I was worried about, that I'd never get the chance to figure anything out on my own. that by the time our baby was born, Margaret would have established herself as the primary decision maker, and I'd be relegated to the role of vessel who carried the baby she would help raise. I should have spoken up then. I should have set boundaries and insisted on taking back control of my pregnancy experience. But I was tired, emotional, and David seemed so happy with how involved his mother was. So I stayed quiet and told myself that once the baby was born, things would be different. Once I was actually a mother, I'd find my confidence and my voice. I had no idea how wrong I was. Emma Rose Williams decided to make her entrance into the world 3 weeks early, on a snowy Tuesday morning in January. I woke up at 5 a.m. with contractions that felt different from the Braxton Hicks I'd been experiencing for weeks. These were real, strong, and coming every 10 minutes. David was incredible during those first few hours. He timed my contractions, helped me breathe through the pain, and made sure our hospital bag was ready. We called my doctor around 7 a.m., and she told us to head to the hospital when the contractions were 5 minutes apart. What we didn't expect was for David to call his mother before we even left the house. "I should let Mom know," he said as I leaned against the kitchen counter, breathing through another contraction. "She'll want to be there." I wanted to object. This was supposed to be our moment, David, and me welcoming our first child into the world. But I was in labor, hardly in a position to argue, and David was already dialing. "Mom, it's time. Sarah's in labor." "Yes, we're heading to the hospital now. City General, maternity ward. Okay, see you soon." By the time we arrived at the hospital and I was settled in a labor and delivery room, Margaret was already in the waiting area. She'd somehow managed to get there before us, despite living 20 minutes farther from the hospital than we did. Labor progressed slowly, much slower than I'd hoped. What I thought would be a quick process turned into 16 hours of increasing pain, exhaustion, and medical interventions. David was by my side the entire time, holding my hand and encouraging me through each contraction. But every hour or so, he'd step out to update his mother on my progress. And every time he came back, he'd share her advice or concerns. "Mom says her labor with me was really long too, so this is probably normal for our family," he'd say. Or, "Mom wanted me to ask if you've considered asking for pain medication yet." The most frustrating part was that Margaret somehow managed to get information about my labor from the nurses. When David went to get coffee during hour 12, a nurse mentioned that "your mother-in-law is very concerned about your progress and wondered if we might need to consider intervention soon." My mother-in-law was discussing my medical care with hospital staff while I was in labor. When I mentioned this to David, he looked confused. "She's just worried about you, Sarah. She's been through this before, she knows what questions to ask." And Emma finally arrived at 9:47 p.m., after a difficult delivery that required an episiotomy and vacuum assistance. The moment they placed her on my chest, wet and screaming and perfect, nothing else mattered. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, with David's dark hair and what looked like my nose. "She's perfect," David whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Sarah, you did it. She's absolutely perfect." For those first few minutes, it was just the three of us, our new little family, complete and perfect. I counted Emma's tiny fingers and toes, I marveled at her long eyelashes, and felt a love so fierce and immediate that it took my breath away. Then the door opened, and Margaret walked in. "Oh my goodness," she said, rushing to my bedside. "Let me see my granddaughter. David, she's beautiful. She looks just like you when you were born." Before I could object, Margaret was reaching for Emma. "May I hold her? I've been waiting all day to meet this little angel." I wasn't ready to let go of my baby yet. She'd been on my chest for maybe 5 minutes, and I was still processing the overwhelming experience of becoming a mother. But Margaret was already lifting Emma from my arms, and David was beaming as his mother cradled our daughter. "Hello, beautiful girl," Margaret cooed, settling into the chair next to my bed. "Grandma has been waiting so long to meet you. You're even more perfect than I imagined." I watched Margaret hold my newborn daughter and felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was happy to see her joy. This was her first grandchild, and her excitement was genuine. But another part of me felt like something had been taken from me, like those precious first moments of motherhood were already being shared with someone who hadn't earned them. Margaret stayed for 2 hours that first night, holding Emma most of the time and offering a steady stream of advice about breastfeeding, sleeping schedules, and newborn care. When the night nurse came in to help me with my first attempt at nursing, Margaret remained in the room, commenting on Emma's latch and suggesting positions I should try. "She seems hungry," Margaret observed as Emma fussed at my breast. "Are you sure you're producing enough milk yet? It can take a few days for some women." The nurse gave Margaret a sharp look. "First, time nursing can take practice for both mother and baby. They're doing fine." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Was Emma getting enough? Was I doing something wrong? Should I be worried that nursing wasn't immediately easy? After Margaret finally left that night, promising to return bright and early tomorrow to help, I tried to enjoy the quiet hours with just David, Emma, and me. The nurses encouraged skin-to-skin contact and gave us space to bond as a family. But I couldn't shake the feeling that our peaceful bubble had already been invaded. The next day brought a parade of visitors, but Margaret was the first to arrive and the last to leave. She'd brought gifts, flowers for me, balloons for the room, and a shopping bag full of newborn outfits for Emma. I couldn't resist, she said, unpacking tiny dresses and sleepers. I saw these and knew they'd be perfect for her. The pink ones especially, she's going to be such a little princess. I noticed that all the clothes were in newborn size, even though Emma had been born at a healthy 7 pounds, 8 ounces, and would likely outgrow newborn clothes within weeks. But Margaret seemed so excited about her gifts that I didn't want to seem ungrateful. When it came time for Emma's first pediatric exam, Margaret somehow positioned herself as the spokesperson for our family. When the pediatrician asked about feeding, Margaret answered before I could speak. "Sarah's trying to breastfeed, but we're not sure if the baby's getting enough," she said. "She seems fussy, and we're wondering if we should supplement with formula." The doctor looked at Emma's chart and then at me. "How do you feel nursing is going?" "I think it's going okay," I said hesitantly. "She seems to be latching fine, and I can hear her swallowing." "That sounds normal for day 2, the doctor said. "Newborns often lose a little weight initially, but Emma's vitals are excellent. I'd encourage you to continue breastfeeding exclusively unless you have concerns." But Margaret's comment had planted doubt in David's mind too. Throughout the day, he watched Emma carefully during feedings, asking if I thought she seemed satisfied and suggesting we ask the nurses about supplemental feeding. "Mom raised me, and she knows the signs when babies aren't getting enough," he said. "Maybe we should consider her advice." By the time we were discharged from the hospital, I felt less confident about my ability to care for Emma than I had when she was born. Margaret's constant observations and suggestions had made me question every instinct, every decision, every moment of connection I had with my daughter. But I told myself this was normal. Margaret was experienced, I was a first-time mother, and it made sense that I'd need guidance during those early days. I should be grateful to have someone so knowledgeable and caring to help me learn. The ride home should have been magical, bringing our baby to her nursery for the first time, starting our life as a family of 3, but Margaret followed us home in her car and came inside to help us get settled. She immediately took charge of Emma while David and I unpacked our hospital bags. She gave her a bottle of formulas, just to make sure she's getting enough nutrition while your milk comes in fully. Changed her diaper. Her technique needs a little work, but she'll learn. And put her down for naps. Babies need routine from day 1. When I tried to object to the formula, Margaret's response was swift and seemingly reasonable. "Sarah, honey, you're exhausted from labor and delivery. Your body needs time to recover and establish milk production. There's nothing wrong with making sure Emma gets proper nutrition while we wait for that to happen. Formula won't hurt her." David was formula, fed after 6 weeks, and look how healthy he turned out. David nodded along. "It makes sense, doesn't it? Just until you're feeling stronger." I found myself agreeing, even though every parenting book I'd read emphasized the importance of exclusive breastfeeding during the first few weeks. But I was tired, emotional, and maybe Margaret was right. Maybe I wasn't producing enough milk yet. Maybe Emma really was still hungry after nursing. Margaret stayed until nearly 10 o'clock that first night, establishing routines and systems that she insisted would make my life easier. She showed me how to prepare bottles. Always test the temperature on your wrist. Demonstrated proper swaddling technique. Babies feel more secure when they're wrapped tightly. And set up a feeding schedule. Every 3 hours, whether she seems hungry or not. When she finally left, promising to come back the next morning to check on how everyone's doing, I sat in Emma's nursery and tried to process everything that had happened since her birth. I was a mother now. I had a beautiful, healthy daughter who depended on me completely. This should have been the happiest moment of my life. So why did I feel like I was failing at it already? Why did it seem like Margaret knew more about caring for my own baby than I did? And why was David so eager to defer to his mother's judgment instead of trusting mine? I looked down at Emma sleeping in my arms and made a silent promise to her and to myself. I would figure this out. I would learn to be the mother she deserved. I would find my confidence and my voice. But as the days turned into weeks, Margaret's presence in our lives only grew stronger, and my confidence only grew weaker. And slowly, I began to realize that this wasn't about helping me learn to be a mother. This was about something else entirely. The first 3 months of Emma's life became a blur of sleepless nights, constant anxiety, and the growing feeling that I was a stranger in my own home. Margaret's daily visits had become so routine that David started setting aside coffee and pastries for her each morning before he left for work. "Mum's been such a lifesaver," he'd say as he kissed me goodbye. I don't know what we'd do without her help. But Margaret's help was starting to feel less like assistance and more like supervision. She had opinions about everything: how often I fed Emma, how long I let her cry, whether the room was too warm or too cold, and especially about my emotional state. "Sarah seems a little overwhelmed today," she'd tell David when he came home from work, speaking about me as if I weren't sitting right there. "I think she might benefit from getting out of the house more." New mothers sometimes get too focused on the baby and forget to take care of themselves. The irony was that Margaret's constant presence was exactly what prevented me from taking care of myself. Every time I tried to establish a routine with Emma or figure out her patterns, Margaret would interrupt with suggestions or corrections. "Are you sure she's hungry again? You just fed her 2 hours ago. That crying sounds like a dirty diaper to me. Have you checked? She seems fussy. Maybe she's overstimulated. Sometimes babies need quiet time." Each comment made me second-guess myself. Maybe I wasn't reading Emma's cues correctly. Maybe I was feeding her too often or not often enough. Maybe I didn't understand my own baby's needs. The worst part was how Margaret had somehow become the baby whisperer in our house. Whenever Emma was crying and I couldn't seem to soothe her, Margaret would step in and somehow get her to calm down almost immediately. "Sometimes babies just need a grandmother's touch," she'd say with a smile that felt both kind and patronizing. "Don't feel bad, Sarah. Some women have a natural instinct for this, and others need more practice." Those words, "some women have a natural instinct," haunted me. Was I one of the women who didn't? Was there something fundamentally wrong with my maternal abilities? I started keeping track of everything in notebooks: feeding times, diaper changes, sleep patterns, crying episodes. I thought if I could just collect enough data, I'd figure out what I was doing wrong and how to fix it. But the more I documented, the more inadequate I felt. Margaret would flip through my notebooks when I wasn't looking and make comments about my record keeping. "You're being a little obsessive about this, don't you think?" she'd say. "Motherhood should feel more natural than this. Maybe you're overthinking everything." But when I tried to be more relaxed and intuitive, she'd criticize that approach too. "Emma seems off her schedule today. Babies thrive on routine, Sarah. It's important to be consistent." I couldn't win. Too structured and I was obsessive. Too flexible and I was inconsistent. Whatever I did felt wrong, and Margaret always seemed to have a better way. The breaking point came during Emma's 3-month pediatric appointment. I'd been looking forward to this checkup. Because Emma seemed to be thriving, she was gaining weight, hitting her milestones, and had started smiling and cooing. I thought the doctor would reassure me that I was doing a good job. Margaret insisted on coming to the appointment with us. "I want to hear what the doctor says about her development," she explained. "And sometimes they ask questions about family medical history that I can help answer." During the exam, Emma was perfect. She tracked objects with her eyes, responded to sounds, and even gave the pediatrician a big smile. The doctor pronounced her healthy and developing beautifully. She's clearly thriving, Dr. Martinez said to me. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. She's a happy, healthy baby. I felt a surge of pride and relief. Finally, confirmation from a medical professional that I was doing something right. But as we were leaving, Margaret made a comment that shattered my moment of confidence. Doctor, I wonder if I could ask you something, she said, turning back. I've been helping Sarah with the baby, and I'm a little concerned about her mood lately. She seems anxious and overwhelmed. Is postpartum depression something we should be worried about? The doctor looked at me with new concern. How are you feeling, Sarah? Are you experiencing persistent sadness, anxiety, or difficulty bonding with Emma? I felt my face burn with embarrassment and anger. I'm fine, I managed to say. Just tired, like any new mother. Of course, Dr. Martinez said kindly. But if you do start feeling overwhelmed or depressed, please don't hesitate to call. Postpartum mood disorders are very common and very treatable. In the car afterward, Margaret patted my hand sympathetically. I hope you're not upset that I brought that up, dear. I'm just worried about you. You haven't seemed like yourself lately, and David's mentioned that you've been crying a lot. David had been discussing my emotional state with his mother. They'd been talking about me, analyzing my behavior, and deciding together that something was wrong with me. I think it might be good for you to talk to someone, Margaret continued. Maybe a counselor who specializes in new mothers. There's no shame in needing help, Sarah. That night, David brought up the subject again. Mom's really worried about you, he said as we got ready for bed. And honestly, I am too. You don't seem happy. So well. I'm not unhappy, I tried to explain. I'm just adjusting. This is all new to me. But it's been 3 months, David said gently. Maybe you should consider talking to someone. Mom knows a really good therapist who works with new mothers. Of course she did. Margaret had a solution for everything. Even my mental health, I agreed to see the therapist. Partly because I was starting to doubt my own perceptions and partly because I hoped a professional might help me figure out why I felt so disconnected from the joy I'd expected motherhood to bring. Dr. Lisa Chen was warm and understanding, and during our first session, I found myself crying as I described how inadequate I felt as a mother. It sounds like you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself, she said. Tell me about your support system. Who's helping you during this transition? I told her about Margaret's daily visits and constant guidance. I expected Dr. Chen to reassure me that having experienced help was a good thing. Instead, she frowned slightly. How do you feel about having your mother-in-law so involved in your daily routine with the baby? The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me how I felt about Margaret's involvement. It had always been presented as obviously beneficial. I guess I'm grateful, I said slowly. She has a lot of experience, and I don't. But how does it make you feel when she offers advice or takes over caring for Emma? I thought about it for a long moment. Small, I said finally. Like I don't know what I'm doing. Like I'm not good enough. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Sarah, learning to be a mother is a process. It takes time to develop confidence and trust your instincts. But that process can be interfered with if someone else is constantly stepping in to fix things or offering corrections. She asked me to try an experiment for the following week, to spend 1 full day caring for Emma without any outside input or assistance. No visits from Margaret, no phone calls asking for advice, just me and my baby figuring things out together. But what if I do something wrong? I asked. What makes you think you will? I couldn't answer that question. The fear of doing something wrong had become so embedded in my thinking that I couldn't imagine trusting myself alone with my own child. When I told David about Dr. Chen's suggestion, he looked worried. Are you sure that's a good idea? What if something happens and you need help? It's just 1 day, David. I'll call you if there's an emergency. Maybe I should mention it to Mom, just so she knows not to come by tomorrow. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Don't tell her. This is between me and my therapist. David looked hurt. We don't keep secrets from Mom, Sarah. She's part of our family. But that was exactly the problem. Margaret had become so embedded in our family that I couldn't have a private conversation with my own husband about my mental health without her becoming involved. The next day, for the first time since Emma was born, I was alone with my daughter for an entire day. and something amazing happened. I discovered that I actually did know what I was doing. When Emma cried, I could figure out what she needed without someone telling me. When she was hungry, I could feed her without worrying about whether it was too soon or too late. When she was fussy, I could soothe her in my own way, and it worked. For the first time in months, I felt like Emma's mother instead of her inadequate caregiver. But when Margaret arrived the next morning and David told her about my experiment, her reaction was swift and concerning. "You left Sarah alone with the baby for an entire day," she asked David, her voice full of worry. What if something had happened? What if she'd had one of her crying spells while she was caring for Emma? One of my crying spells. As if my occasional tears were a medical condition that made me dangerous to my own child. "I think that therapist is putting ideas in Sarah's head," Margaret continued. "Encouraging a new mother to isolate herself from family support isn't healthy. Maybe you should consider finding someone else for her to talk to." That afternoon, while Emma napped, I overheard Margaret on the phone in our kitchen. She was talking quietly, but I could hear snippets of the conversation from the nursery. "I'm really worried about her, not bonding properly with the baby, refusing help from family. The therapist seems to be making things worse." I crept closer to the doorway and heard more. "I think we need to document these behaviors. If it gets worse, we might need to consider what's best for the baby." My blood ran cold. Document these behaviors. Consider what? What was best for the baby? I backed away from the kitchen and sat heavily in the nursery chair, my heart pounding. What kind of conversation was Margaret having, and with whom? That night I tried to tell David what I'd overheard, but he dismissed my concerns. "You probably misunderstood," he said. "Mom's just worried about you. She might have been talking to her friend Helen about finding you a different therapist." But I knew what I'd heard. Margaret wasn't just worried about me, she was discussing me with someone as if I were a problem that needed to be solved. As I lay awake that night listening to Emma's peaceful breathing through the baby monitor, I realized that my instinct had been right from the beginning. This wasn't about Margaret wanting to help me become a better mother. This was about something much more dangerous. And I was finally ready to find out what it was. The text messages that changed everything were discovered by complete accident on a rainy Thursday morning in April, when Emma was 4 months old. David had left his phone charging on the kitchen counter when he rushed out to an early meeting, and I was cleaning up breakfast dishes when it buzzed with an incoming message. The notification preview showed Margaret's name and the beginning of a text. "I documented another episode yesterday when Sarah." I stared at that partial message for a long moment, my heart starting to race. Documented another episode? What kind of episodes was Margaret documenting about me and why? I knew I shouldn't read David's private messages. But that word, documented, was the same word I'd heard Margaret use during her mysterious phone conversation weeks earlier. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone. The message preview disappeared when the screen locked, but I knew David's passcode. We'd never kept secrets from each other about our phones. At least, I thought we hadn't. I unlocked his phone and opened the text thread with Margaret. What I found there destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my family. The conversation went back months, all the way to when Emma was born. But it wasn't the loving exchanges between a son and mother that I'd expected. It was a calculated campaign of documentation and manipulation that made my blood run cold. Margaret, February 15. "I'm concerned about Sarah's emotional state today. She cried 3 times during my visit and seemed overwhelmed by basic baby care tasks. I think we should start keeping track of these incidents." Is February 15 fickle? Is it really that bad? "She seems okay to me." The Vice Margaret, February 15 of David, "Honey, you're at work all day. You don't see what I see." She's struggling more than she wants to admit. "I'm just worried about Emma's well-being if this continues." Said David, February 16, sigh. "What do you think we should do?" I express Margaret, February 16. "So for now, just document anything concerning you notice. Times when she seems unstable, episodes of crying, inability to soothe Emma. We need to have a record in case this gets worse." I scrolled down with trembling fingers, finding weeks of similar exchanges. Margaret reporting my concerning behaviors to David, and David dutifully noting instances when I seemed tired, frustrated, or emotional, all perfectly normal reactions for a new mother. but presented as evidence of my unfitness. Affairs Margaret March Tour Sarah Hare refused my help with Emma's bath today and became defensive when I suggested her technique could improve. She seems to resent any guidance from family. David's March to you, she mentioned that to me. Said she wants to figure things out herself. Margaret March to you, that's concerning. David refusing help and isolating from family support are red flags. I think you should start noting when she displays this kind of resistance to involvement from people who care about Emma. Ss Margaret's March 8 high says Sarah had another crying spell today while Emma was napping. When I asked what was wrong, she became agitated and asked me to leave. This pattern of emotional instability is worrying. Guys David's March 8, maybe I should talk to Atalsa about seeing someone. Tas Margaret March 8 and Setchis, that's a good idea. But David, if she refuses help or therapy, we might need to consider more serious interventions. Emma's safety has to come first. The messages got worse as I continued reading. Margaret wasn't just documenting my behavior, she was actively trying to create situations that would make me look unstable, then reporting my reactions to David as evidence of my unfitness as a mother. Bess Margaret, March 15, I brought up the vaccination schedule with Sarah today, and she became very defensive, saying she'd already discussed it with the pediatrician. When I shared some articles about vaccine timing, she asked me not to bring her more medical advice. This resistance to protecting Emma's health is concerning. The vaccination conversation she was referencing had been about spacing out Emma's shots, something my pediatrician and I had already decided on based on Emma's health and development. But Margaret had presented my refusal to change our plan as evidence that I was neglecting Emma's medical care. Of Margaret March 22 via True, I found Sarah's tracking notebook. Today, she's obsessively documenting every aspect of Emma's daily routine down to the minute. This level of anxiety and need for control suggests she's not coping well with motherhood. David's March 22. She showed me that notebook. I thought it seemed pretty organized. Margaret March 22 have stated David, normal mothers don't need to write down every feeding and diaper change. This is compulsive behavior, combined with her mood swings and resistance to family involvement. I think we're seeing a pattern of postpartum mental health issues. I remembered that notebook. I'd started keeping it because Margaret's constant questions about Emma's schedule had made me feel like I needed to prove I was paying attention to my baby's needs. But somehow, my attempt to be a responsible mother had been twisted into evidence of mental instability. The most chilling exchange came from just 2 weeks ago. U.S. Margaret's April 3, that we need to talk seriously about next steps. I've been researching postpartum psychosis and some of Sarah's behaviors are concerning. The isolation, mood swings, and obsessive behaviors could escalate. As David's April 3's, do you really think it's that serious? Margaret's April theorize, I think we need to be prepared. I've been in touch with my friend Linda, who's a family court mediator. She says if there are documented concerns about a mother's mental health, temporary custody arrangements can be made to protect the child. That's David's April 3, Mom. That seems extreme. Yeah. Margaret's April 4, David, I raised you to put family first. Emma is our family now, and her safety is more important than Sarah's feelings. If Sarah won't get help, we may need to get help for Emgrit. April 4 CEs, Alinda says the key is having detailed documentation of concerning incidents. Everything we've been tracking could be crucial if we need to show that Emma would be safer with family who can provide stable care. He says David's April 4th and I never thought it would come to that. Margaret's April 4. I hope it doesn't. But David, promise me you'll keep documenting what you observe. We need to be prepared to protect Emma if Sarah's condition deteriorates further. David's April 4 is okay. I'll pay closer attention. I sank onto the kitchen floor, still clutching David's phone, as the full scope of what I was reading hit me. This wasn't about Margaret being a concerned grandmother or David being a worried husband. This was a systematic campaign to build a case against me as a mother. Margaret had been manipulating situations to make me appear unstable, then documenting my responses as evidence of mental illness. She'd convinced David that I was suffering from postpartum psychosis, a condition I didn't have, and was laying the groundwork to take Emma away from me. The friend Linda she mentioned wasn't just any friend. She was a family court mediator who could help them navigate custody proceedings. Margaret had been planning this for months. I scrolled to the most recent messages, sent just yesterday after Margaret's visit. Assess Margaret's April tempered Sarah seemed particularly agitated yesterday when I tried to help with Emma's feeding schedule. She actually asked me to leave the house. This rejection of family support, combined with her emotional volatility, is escalating. David as April tempers as she did seem stressed when I got home. Waza Margaret April 11 tenderizing. I think it's time to have a serious conversation about intervention. Linda says we have enough documentation to request a custody evaluation if necessary. David, I know this is hard, but Emma's well-being has to come first. See yesterday. Margaret had sent that message yesterday, which meant David had received it last night. He'd come home, kissed me hello, played with Emma, and gone to bed beside me, all while knowing his mother was building a case to take our child away. I heard David's key in the front door and quickly put his phone back where I'd found it, my mind racing. He walked into the kitchen with his usual smile, gave me a quick kiss, and reached for his phone. "How's my girls this morning?" he asked. Completely normal, completely loving, as if he wasn't part of a plan to destroy our family. "We're fine," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange even to me. David glanced at his phone and I watched his face as he read Margaret's latest message. His expression didn't change much, but I saw the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was thinking about something serious. "Everything okay?" I asked, testing him. "Yeah, just work stuff," he said, putting the phone in his pocket. "Mom's coming by later, right?" I asked. I honestly had no idea. Margaret's visits had become so routine that I'd stopped keeping track of when she was planning to appear. She mentioned she wanted to check on how Emma's doing with the new sleep schedule. David said, "You know how much she cares about making sure everything's going well." Everything's going well. As if Margaret's visits were about Emma's well-being instead of gathering evidence against me. I spent the rest of the morning in a fog of shock and growing panic. Every interaction I'd had with Margaret over the past 4 months suddenly made sense in this new, horrifying context. Every time she'd made me feel inadequate. Every suggestion that had undermined my confidence. Every moment when she'd positioned herself as the better caregiver, it had all been deliberate. She hadn't been trying to help me become a better mother. She'd been trying to prove I was an unfit one. And David, my husband, the father of my child, had been helping her do it. When Margaret arrived that afternoon with her usual cheerful demeanor and bag of supplies, I watched her with new eyes. She hugged me hello and asked how I was feeling with the same concerned expression she always wore. But now I could see the calculation behind it, the way she was studying my face and body language for signs of distress she could document later. "How did Emma sleep last night?" she asked, settling into the living room with her notebook, the notebook I now realized was for recording my failures, not tracking Emma's progress. "She slept well," I said carefully. "And how are you feeling? You look a little tired. Are you getting enough rest?" Every question felt like a trap. If I said I was tired, it would become evidence that I wasn't coping. If I said I felt fine, she might push harder to find something wrong. "I'm doing well," I said. "Emma's been great." Margaret made a note in her book, and I wondered what she was writing. Another instance of Sarah appearing defensive. Potential denial of struggling with basic self-care. When Emma woke up from her nap and started fussing, I went to get her, but Margaret stood up too. "Let me see if I can settle her," she said, reaching for my baby. "Sometimes a grandmother's touch is just what they need. I've got her," I said, stepping back with Emma in my arms. Margaret's expression flickered for just a moment, a flash of something cold and calculating before the concerned smile returned. "Of course, dear. I just thought you might want a break." But I knew what was really happening. If I let Margaret take Emma and she calmed down faster for her than for me, it would become another data point in Margaret's case that Emma was better off with her grandmother. I held my daughter close and felt a fierce protectiveness rise up in me like nothing I'd ever experienced before. They weren't going to take her from me. I wouldn't let them. But first, I needed to figure out exactly how far this plan had progressed and what I could do to stop it. Because now I knew the truth. This wasn't about my mental health or Emma's well-being. This was about Margaret stealing my child, and my own husband was helping her do it. That night, after David fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and planning my strategy. I had discovered their plot, but discovery wasn't enough. I needed evidence, and I needed a plan to protect Emma and myself from what was coming. The first thing I did was start my own documentation. If Margaret and David were building a case against me, I would build one against them. I created a new email account on my phone and began typing everything I could remember about the past 4 months, every undermining comment, every time Margaret had taken over Emma's care against my wishes, every instance where David had deferred to his mother instead of supporting his wife. I wrote until 3 in the morning, documenting incident after incident that I had dismissed as misunderstandings or personality conflicts. Seeing it all laid out chronologically, the pattern was undeniable. This had been planned from the moment Emma was born. The next morning, I called Dr. Chen and asked for an emergency session. "Sarah, you sound distressed," she said when I arrived at her office an hour later. "What's happened?" I told her everything about the text messages, Margaret's documentation campaign, the plan to claim I had postpartum psychosis, and David's betrayal. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "Sarah, what you're describing is psychological abuse," she said when I finished. "This systematic undermining of your confidence as a mother, combined with the documentation campaign, constitutes a form of gaslighting designed to make you question your own sanity and capabilities." Hearing a professional use those words, psychological abuse, gaslighting, validated everything I had been feeling for months. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't inadequate. I was being deliberately manipulated. "I need you to write a professional assessment," I said. "Something that documents my actual mental state, not the distorted version Margaret has been creating." Dr. Chen nodded. "I can absolutely do that. Based on our sessions and my observations, you show no signs of postpartum depression or psychosis. Your anxiety has been a direct result of the toxic environment you've been forced to navigate, not an underlying mental health condition." She handed me her business card with her direct number written on the back. "Call me immediately if this situation escalates. What you're describing could potentially become a legal matter involving child welfare, and you'll need professional support." My next stop was Emma's pediatrician. Martinez had been seeing Emma since birth and had consistently praised my care of her. I needed that documented too. "I'd like a written summary of Emma's health and development," I told her nurse when I called, "and any notes about my interactions with her during appointments." "Is everything okay?" the nurse asked, hearing something in my voice. "I'm being proactive about keeping good records," I said carefully. "Can you also note in Emma's file that I'm requesting all medical decisions go through me as her mother? I want to make sure there's no confusion about who has authority over her care." That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I secretly recorded one of Margaret's visits. My phone was in my pocket, running a voice recording app, as Margaret went through her usual routine of criticizing my choices and undermining my confidence. The recording was devastating. In less than an hour, Margaret made 17 separate comments designed to make me doubt my parenting abilities. She questioned my feeding schedule, criticized Emma's outfit choice, suggested I wasn't reading her cues correctly, and implied that Emma seemed less content than during her previous visit. But the most damning moment came when Emma started crying and I moved to comfort her. "Let me try," Margaret said, reaching for my baby. "Sometimes she just needs someone who knows what they're doing." "Someone who knows what they're doing," said about a mother caring for her own 4-month-old daughter. I let Margaret take Emma, and my baby did calm down quickly, probably because she was tired and ready to settle regardless of who was holding her. But Margaret's reaction was telling. "See," she said, bouncing Emma gently. "She knows her grandmother understands her needs. Some babies are just more sensitive to their caregiver's anxiety levels." Even when I was being completely calm, Margaret found a way to suggest that my anxiety was affecting Emma. It was psychological manipulation at its most sophisticated level. That evening, when David came home, I watched him carefully for signs of the conspiracy I now knew about. He seemed normal, asked about my day, played with Emma, helped with dinner preparation. But I noticed him watching me more closely than usual, and when Emma cried during dinner, I saw him observing how I responded. He was evaluating me. My own husband was mentally taking notes about my fitness as a mother. When Margaret called after dinner, I listened to David's side of the conversation with new understanding. "Yeah, she seemed okay today. Emma was a little fussy, but nothing unusual. I don't know, maybe a little more tired than normal. He was reporting to his mother about my behavior like an employee giving a status update to his supervisor. After he hung up, I tested him. "What did your mom want?" "Just checking in," he said casually. Seeing how Emma's doing. Seeing how Emma's doing, not how we were doing as a family, not how I was feeling as his wife. How Emma was doing, as if Emma's well-being was separate from and potentially threatened by mine. Over the next week, I continued gathering evidence while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. I documented every text exchange I could access when David left his phone unattended. I recorded 2 more of Margaret's visits. I researched family law and learned about custody evaluations, parental rights, and what constituted grounds for removing a child from a parent's care. The research was terrifying. While the bar for removing a child from a loving home was high, I learned that documented concerns about a mother's mental health, especially if corroborated by family members, could trigger investigations and temporary custody changes while evaluations were conducted. Margaret and David weren't just building a case, they were building a credible case that could actually work. I also learned that Linda, Margaret's friend from family court, was indeed a respected mediator with influence in the local family court system. If Margaret could present her evidence to Linda and get her professional opinion that Emma was at risk, it could fast-track their custody petition. But I was building my own case too, Dr. Chen's professional assessment documented my actual mental state and identified the psychological abuse I had endured. Doc. Martinez provided written confirmation of Emma's excellent health and development under my care. I had recorded evidence of Margaret's manipulative behavior and David's complicity. Most importantly, I had figured out their timeline. Based on the text messages, they were planning to move forward with their custody petition within the next few weeks, probably after Emma's 6-month checkup, when they could argue that I'd had enough time to improve, and hadn't done so. The night before Emma's first birthday party, which Margaret had insisted on hosting at her house, I made my final preparations. I had copies of all my evidence stored in multiple places. I had contacted a family law attorney and had a consultation scheduled for the following Monday. I had even prepared a safety plan in case I needed to leave quickly with Emma. But more than anything, I had found my voice and my strength. Months of systematic psychological abuse had nearly broken me, but discovering the truth had awakened something fierce and protective in me that I didn't know existed. I was Emma's mother. Not Margaret, not David, not anyone else had the right to make decisions about my child's welfare based on manufactured evidence and manipulated situations. Tomorrow, at Emma's birthday party, I was going to confront them both with everything I knew. I was going to demand an end to their campaign against me. And I was going to make it clear that I would fight with everything I had to protect my daughter and our family. I had been silent and compliant for too long. I had allowed them to make me doubt myself and my abilities as a mother. But that version of me was gone. The woman who would walk into Margaret's house tomorrow was someone different, someone who knew her worth, who trusted her instincts, and who would never again allow anyone to make her feel like she wasn't enough for her own child. Margaret had made one crucial mistake in her campaign to steal Emma. She had underestimated the power of a mother's love and the lengths a woman would go to protect her baby. Tomorrow she would learn exactly how wrong she had been. Emma's first birthday party was supposed to be a celebration of joy and milestones. Instead, it became the day I saved my family from destruction. Margaret had transformed her house into a perfect party venue, complete with pink and gold decorations, a professionally made cake, and enough presents to stock a toy store. Extended family members filled her living room, cooing over Emma in her frilly birthday dress, and taking pictures that would forever capture this moment. But underneath the festive atmosphere, I could feel the tension. Margaret was in full hostess mode, accepting compliments on the beautiful party and presenting herself as the doting grandmother who had organized everything. David was helping serve cake and chatting with relatives, playing the role of proud father, and I was the outsider at my own daughter's birthday party, watching other people celebrate my child while building the courage to destroy the careful facade they had all believed. I waited until after the cake, after the presents, after most of the extended family had said their goodbyes. Only Margaret's closest friends and David's aunt and uncle remained when I finally stood up in Margaret's living room and asked for everyone's attention. Before we finished celebrating Emma's first year, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I need to share something important with all of you. Margaret looked surprised but pleased, probably thinking I was going to give a speech thanking her for hosting such a beautiful party. David looked confused but encouraging, nodding at me to continue. They had no idea what was coming. For the past year, I began, I've been struggling with feeling like I wasn't good enough as Emma's mother. I've been anxious, emotional, and constantly doubting my parenting abilities. I thought it was just normal new mother insecurity. Margaret nodded sympathetically, her concerned grandmother expression perfectly in place. But last week, I discovered the truth about why I've been feeling this way. And I think it's important for everyone who loves Emma to understand what's really been happening in our family. I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots of David's text messages that I had saved there. David, I said, looking directly at my husband, would you like to explain to everyone here why your mother has been documenting my concerning behaviors for the past year? Or why she's been in touch with a family court mediator about temporary custody arrangements for Emma? The color drained from David's face. Margaret's smile faltered for just a moment before she tried to recover. Sarah, dear, I think you might be misunderstanding. Margaret began. No, I said firmly, cutting her off. I'm not misunderstanding anything. I have the text messages, I have recordings of your visits. I have documentation of a systematic campaign to make me believe I was an unfit mother so that you could build a case to take my daughter away from me. The room fell silent. David's aunt gasped. Margaret's friend Linda, the same Linda from the text messages, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Margaret has spent months manipulating situations to make me appear unstable, then reporting my normal reactions to stress as evidence of mental illness. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. She's documented everything from my occasional tears to my desire for independence as signs that I'm dangerous to Emma's well-being. I turned to address the room. Did you know that wanting to bathe my own baby without supervision was considered resistance to family guidance? That keeping track of Emma's feeding schedule was labeled obsessive behavior? That asking for one day alone to bond with my daughter was reported as concerning isolation from support systems? Margaret tried to interrupt again. Sarah, you're clearly having some kind of episode. I'm not having an episode, Margaret. I'm having a revelation. And I think everyone here deserves to know the truth about the woman they've been praising as such a devoted grandmother. I played one of my recordings on speaker. Margaret's voice filled the room as she criticized my parenting, undermined my confidence, and suggested that Emma needed someone who knows what they're doing. The silence that followed was deafening. David found his voice first. Sarah, how could you record private conversations? How could I record evidence of psychological abuse? How could I document the systematic destruction of my mental health? David, you've been helping her. You've been reporting on me like I'm a suspect instead of your wife. I turned back to the room. My husband and his mother have been building a case to prove I'm an unfit mother, based on manufactured evidence and deliberate manipulation. They've been planning to take Emma away from me since the day she was born. David's aunt stood up abruptly. This is unbelievable, Margaret. Is this true? Margaret's mask finally slipped completely. Her concerned grandmother expression disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. Emma deserves better than a mother who can't handle the responsibilities of parenthood, she said, her voice sharp with anger. Sarah has been unstable from the beginning. Everything I've done has been to protect my granddaughter. Your granddaughter, I said, stepping closer to where Margaret sat. Emma's my daughter. I carried her, I birthed her. I've cared for her every single day of her life. You don't get to decide she deserves better than her own mother. You've been crying constantly, refusing help, showing signs of depression and anxiety. Margaret started. I've been crying because you've been emotionally abusing me, I shouted, finally letting out months of suppressed anger. I've been anxious because you've made me doubt every instinct I have as a mother. I've been refusing your help because it was never help, it was sabotage. The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Linda quietly gathered her purse and left without saying goodbye. David's uncle shook his head in disgust. David stepped forward, his face pale and stricken. Sarah, I never meant. I thought Mom was genuinely worried about you. I thought we were trying to help. You thought reporting my every emotion to your mother was helping. You thought documenting my concerning behaviors was supporting your wife. David, you chose her over me, over us, over our family. I could see the moment David realized the full scope of what he had participated in. His face crumpled as he understood that his mother had manipulated him too, using his love for Emma and his trust in her judgment to turn him against his own wife. I'm sorry, he whispered. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand what was really happening. Margaret stood up, her composure completely shattered. You're all overreacting. I was protecting Emma from a mother who clearly couldn't handle. Stop, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Just stop. Everyone in this room has now heard exactly who you are, Margaret. You're not a concerned grandmother. You're a manipulative woman who was willing to destroy your son's marriage and traumatize a new mother to get control of a baby. I picked up Emma from her high chair, holding her close to my chest. Here's what's going to happen. You will never again be alone with my daughter. You will never again comment on my parenting choices. You will never again document my behavior or discuss my mental health with anyone. Margaret's eyes flashed with rage. You can't keep me from my granddaughter. Yes, I can. And if you try to pursue any legal action against me, I will make sure every family court, judge in this county sees the evidence of your psychological abuse campaign. I will make sure they understand that your concern for Emma was actually an attempt to steal her from her loving mother. I turned to David. We're leaving. You can come home with us and start working to rebuild our marriage. Or you can stay here with your mother and lose your family forever. But this ends today. David looked between his mother and me, and for a moment I thought he might choose her. But then he walked over and kissed Emma's forehead, then looked at me with tears in his eyes. Let's go home, he said quietly. As we gathered Emma's things and prepared to leave, Margaret made one final attempt to maintain control. This isn't over, she said, her voice shaking with fury. I won't let you keep Emma from me. I turned back to her one last time. Margaret, it was over the moment you decided that your desire to control a baby was more important than respecting her mother. Emma will have a relationship with her grandmother someday, but only when you've acknowledged what you did and made real changes. Until then, she's better off without your toxic influence in her life. We drove home in silence, Emma babbling happily in her car seat, oblivious to the fact that her first birthday had become the day her mother finally found her voice and saved their family. That night, after we put Emma to bed, David and I had the longest, most difficult conversation of our marriage. He cried as he read through the text messages, seeing them clearly for the first time without his mother's manipulation clouding his judgment. She convinced me you were sick, he said through his tears. She made me believe that documenting your behavior was protecting Emma. I'm so ashamed, Sarah. I betrayed you in the worst possible way. It took months of marriage counseling, strict boundaries with Margaret, and David's complete commitment to rebuilding my trust before our marriage began to heal. But we did heal, stronger than before, and with a clear understanding of what we would and wouldn't accept from family members. Margaret attempted to file for grandparent visitation rights 6 months later, but her case was dismissed when I presented evidence of her psychological abuse campaign. She eventually moved to another state to live near her sister, sending birthday and Christmas cards that we decided as a family whether or not to acknowledge. Emma is 5 years old now, happy and healthy, and completely unaware of the drama that surrounded her first year of life. She has 2 little brothers, and I've never once doubted my ability to mother them. David has become the husband and father I always knew he could be, and our marriage is built on honesty, mutual respect, and firm boundaries with toxic family members. Sometimes I think about the woman I was during those first months of Emma's life, exhausted, anxious, constantly doubting herself and apologizing for taking up space in her own family. That woman was a victim of psychological abuse so sophisticated that she didn't even recognize it was happening. But she was also stronger than she knew, and when her child's welfare was threatened, she found a voice she didn't know she had and fought with a ferocity that surprised everyone, including herself. I tell this story not for sympathy, but as a warning and a reminder. Family members can be abusers too. Manipulation can be disguised as concern. And sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones working hardest to control and diminish you. But I also tell it as a promise to any woman who recognizes herself in my story. You are stronger than you know, your instincts are valid, and your child needs you exactly as you are. Don't let anyone, not even family, convince you otherwise. Trust yourself, fight for yourself. And never ever let anyone make you feel like you're not enough for your own child. You are enough, you always were.